We are back with the HubScale podcast, where we dive into the minds of security leaders all around the world. This week, we have Frank Kim, the CISO in residence of Wild Ventures, and really looking forward to diving into a lot of topics today. Frank, it's great to have you on.
Elliott, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So I guess for the listeners who don't know Frank Kim, it'd be great if you could give a introduction to yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. As you mentioned, I'm the CISO in residence at YL Ventures, a early stage venture capital firm. I'm also a fellow at the SANS Institute, where we provide cybersecurity training of all kinds. Before that, I was the CISO at the SANS Institute and had security leadership roles at various other organizations, helping to build security teams and security programs, usually at large enterprises. If we go way back, I started my career as a developer, as an engineer, over 20 years ago, building applications and systems. And the way I got into security is, well, I wrote a bunch of code that unknowingly back then had a number of security issues in it. And of course, I had to figure out how to fix those. And somehow I became the guy that had to deal with any security issues and incidents that would arise. And it naturally led me to, well, working full-time in security, doing various things, pen testing, assessments, code reviews, and so on, and eventually building out various teams across different organizations, across the security program. And so, yeah, that's led me to spending, yeah, I guess I would say the vast majority of my career on the buy side of the table, buying and deploying various security capabilities, which is why now, I work in venture, trying to give some advice to startups on how to sell to various enterprises and CISOs.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool journey, and obviously you spent 8 years at the SANS Institute, and then obviously stepped into this role with Wild Ventures, and pretty recently, well, over the past year and a half. So it sounds like a really cool journey, and even the transition into security. I always like to figure out how did you actually get into security, and that you basically learned from your own code. So that's awesome stuff. And you're actually the second guest from Wild Ventures, which is the first for the HubScale podcast. But tell me a little bit more about Wild Ventures.
Yeah, so YL Ventures, I know you spoke to Michael Cortez, our partner, earlier. And at YL, we really focus on, of course, well, cybersecurity, but we only focus on doing the earliest stage, the seed stage investments, and we only invest in, well, founders from Israel. So it's very interesting, right? It's kind of a niche of a niche of a niche, cybersecurity, seed stage, and Israeli founders. And the reason we focus on that is because, well, over the time that the firm has been around, well before my time, it's been a good strategy, actually, in terms of, hey, taking that pipeline of very high quality cybersecurity talent that's coming out of Israel and trying to give them access to the US market, which is what we're focused on here in the US in terms of kind of that go-to-market support for those Israeli entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. I remember having Michael on the podcast, diving right into the details about some of the stuff and some of your portfolio, which is absolutely awesome. But the question I want to ask you, Frank, is what's your role as a CISO in residence, and how does that kind of help the portfolio companies?
Yeah. Well, overall, we try to do a lot of value add support, whether it be in finance, in marketing, in HR, and so on. And of course, these are all cybersecurity startups. And as a result, we try to give them as much support in security as well. Now, that's not building their security capabilities, they're experts in that, but it's about what features and functionality is going to be useful. How do you get inside the mind of a CISO? What works in terms of kind of building that relationship with your potential customer and their various teams? So for me, as the CISO in residence, I really focus on three things. Is number one, kind of staying in touch on a regular basis and supporting our existing portfolio companies, our existing founders. And that could range depending on the level of support that they need at that particular stage, at that particular phase. Some of the very earliest companies is really around brainstorming, ideation, product market fit. And as they get a little bit further, it might be around some, well, refinement of the messaging, some nailing those killer use cases, and of course, supporting them in their interactions with those various CISOs. So that's the first thing. The second big bucket that I focus on is, well, supporting and staying in touch with the founding teams that we may not have an investment in. And actually, to be honest, that we might not invest in at all. Part of the founding ethos of YL Ventures is really to just support the cybersecurity and the Israeli startup ecosystem. And that's also brainstorming with those potential founders and seeing if, hey, it would be a fit for them to want to have YL Ventures as a partner. And then, of course, the third thing here in terms of, well, number one was supporting our existing portfolio companies. Number two was supporting our potential, right? Founding teams that we may or may not invest in. And number three is really just kind of trying to be honest, stay in touch with various CISOs. Having worked for over a couple decades, I've got a lot of friends and colleagues in the industry. And as a result, it's really just staying in touch and understanding, well, what are the problems that they're currently having as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that can obviously, all of them buckets together will support that first bucket as well, won't it? About really helping your portfolio companies and understanding it's not just that your companies and that's it. You're building an ecosystem wherever that may take you as well. But that's pretty cool. And I guess for anybody listening, I have a lot of CEOs and founders on this podcast who go through that really early stage, which is always the difficult part to figure out that part. But what do you look for when spending time with early stage vendors and obviously the entrepreneurs coming out of Israel?
I would say it's probably three different things. The first and most important, which is really kind of permeates everything that we do at the firm, is all about the team. You've probably heard there's that horse and jockey type of analogy where you've got the jockey, the CEO, the founding team, and we spend a lot of time kind of trying to understand where they're coming from, what their background is, their experience, their motivation to solve this particular problem. What makes that particular team so well suited to solve this particular cybersecurity issue. And cybersecurity itself is already a niche. So we're talking kind of a niche within a niche here as well in terms of the specific security problem and challenge that they're trying to address. So definitely, the team, the biggest factor is the team there. But number two is, well, what's the idea? Is the space actually big enough for a very large cybersecurity company? And we're always thinking about that. And, we got the big brush strokes, of course, hey, is there something in identity or endpoint or network or cloud and so on? But within there, as in the recent years, we've had an explosion of cybersecurity startups across the industry. We spend a lot of time thinking about, well, hey, where is there overlap? Where is there potential conflict within not only our existing portfolio, but what else is out there in the landscape and the industry overall? So a lot of time on the team, a lot of time spent on the idea. But I would say another aspect of it is timing. If cloud security has technically been around for a long time, AWS, for example, I can't remember now, released their first service some 15 years ago or so. But if we tried to start a cloud security startup back then, well, it wouldn't have been very successful. It took a while for the industry to mature. And now you've got the plethora of cloud security related companies. One area we're kind of keeping an eye on, of course, is AI, artificial intelligence, the hot topic of the day. We've talked to a lot of potential teams and, really it's kind of thinking about, well, hey, what's the right fit for that founding team? What's their AI background? But also kind of what is that idea? What's the niche in AI that they're specifically going after? So, we're still looking into that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know you're obviously an investor and an advisor for a lot of vendors as well, and obviously helping them with that journey. But just explain to me a little bit about what you see from the best entrepreneurs that come out. What's kind of the traits that you see with people?
Yeah, the hey Elliott, unfortunately, this might maybe be a little bit of cliche, but kind of in all of my interactions with them, there's kind of even simple things, simple indicators of how quote unquote aggressive are they in following up? Do they schedule that next meeting? Do they ask those deeper probing questions? So it's kind of that kind of grit, that stick to itiveness, that kind of hey, figuring out what else that they can do, kind of a little bit of that sense of urgency, I would say. And I don't mean, you don't have to be a jerk, right, for these things to manifest, but it's even something as simple as, hey, you've got a meeting with the CISO and it's a great meeting and the CISO seems to really resonate with the idea and the space, but then it's making sure that there's some follow-up. Okay, well, what's the next step? Who else on your team could I talk to? And you know what? Even if it wasn't a great meeting, even if it didn't sound all that like a great fit, part of it is, well, is there somebody else on the team? We as an early stage startup would really just love to learn more. Is there somebody else on the team that we can talk to get their feedback on this as well? So of course, yeah, I mean, by definition, all of these founders are great technologists, experts in their field. But yeah, part of it is some of those soft things that come with time and come with experience.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good advice, and that's actually kind of leads into the next part. Like, what advice would you give to startups, especially looking to that really early stage before seed? What advice would you give to people looking to go out there and kind of capture somebody like Wild Ventures?
Yeah, it could be a little bit overwhelming. If somebody is a first-time founder, a first-time founding team, and the biggest bit of advice I would say is, go out and talk to as many CISOs and security leaders and practitioners as possible, and kind of get their feedback on the idea that you're actually thinking about. Now, the hard part, the overwhelming part is, how do you kind of figure out what the signal is compared to the noise? You're going to hear a ton of different things, and that's the magic in terms of kind of as a startup founder, as a CEO, is being able to decipher, being able to discern, well, what that signal, all of those conversations are telling you, and a little bit of, okay, well, this is what they need today, but then what might they need tomorrow, next week, next year, and so on. So, those are all things that I would really suggest, spending a lot of time on in terms of that initial, very pre-investment phase is
Yeah.
what resonates with the target customer.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. That's really, really good advice. And one of the I was reading a lot of your articles in preparation for the podcast, and one of them on there you talk about security should be business friendly, and so just explain what that means to everybody.
Yeah, hey, I'm guilty of this myself, to be honest. Back in the early days, I always thought, hey, we, the security team, we perhaps knew best, if you will. And there's that cliche of security is commonly seen as the department, the team of no. Anybody else comes and asks to use a new app, a new service, and you do something else, and by default we say no. And well, why? Why do we say no? Well, because we think we know best, and that is the exact opposite of what we should be doing from a business enablement, from a business partnership perspective. When we in security, we choose a solution, a capability to roll out, and we deploy it. How many options have we given the business, our partners in the organization? Well, we've effectively given them zero choice, because we've said, look, we're doing this, period, and it's this or nothing, right? And nobody likes to be told what to do. When we're rushing out the door and I'm anxious to get out and I say, come on, put on your shoes, and they're resisting, well, it makes it a little bit easier, the conversation a little bit easier when I say, well, do you want to put on your blue shoes or your red shoes? And it's that type of choice that we as CISOs need to give our organizations as well. It's like, hey, do you want access to the network or nothing? Well, we want you to update your device and have these controls on it. But if you don't, well, we could give you access to the guest network. Now, hey, we know that's not really anything from a work perspective, but at least it's something as a basic example. So it's really us as CISOs evolving beyond just IT security, but to be that modern CISO, if you will, to think about, well, what are the business goals, the strategic objectives of the organization, and making sure that we can map what we do day to day from a security perspective to those higher level strategic objectives.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool, and I love the examples with your kids there about the shoes. I think that that hits home pretty well. But I guess there's a lot of CISOs listen to this. I previously had on the co-founder and CEO of Surf Security. He was previously a CISO before, and so a lot of people in that world want to get into kind of what you do, Frank, in terms of advising for companies and everything along those lines, because that's a sweet spot what a lot of them want to do. So how would you kind of give advice to somebody stepping or wanting to step from a CISO role into maybe an entrepreneur route or kind of the advisor route which you have?
Yeah, really good question. I do hear that similar question a lot as well. And, from a personal perspective, even before joining YL, I've been advising and angel investing in startups for about the last 6 years now. And I will say, about 10 years ago, around that time, I thought to myself, hey, I mean, I'm very familiar with the very product landscape, very familiar with security. And I thought, hey, it would be nice to get a little bit more involved in the venture world. And I talked to some other folks, and they basically said, well, hey, you should go meet some VCs. Well, 10, 12 years ago, to be honest, I didn't know any other VCs. So I started, as we do from a networking perspective, start to try to make some connections and reach out to some folks. And I remember, Elliott, some of those early meetings that I had with various VCs, it was pretty clear from the first 2 minutes that they didn't want to talk to me, right? Because I was asking some basic introductory questions, right, about the landscape and the environment and so on, right? And I mean, I got the sense that they were thinking, well, hey, what can this guy actually help me with, right? But that was part of my learning process in terms of understanding the VC world, in terms of kind of portfolio construction and the way that different investments are made and so on. And I would say, to your question in terms of advice is, hey, there are so many security startups out there, is go ahead and connect with some of them. Maybe you resonate with the problem space. You've got to develop a relationship with the CEO and help them out. Figure out what challenges that they're having. Sometimes it's just advice. Sometimes it's go to market. Sometimes it's introduction to other friends, other CISOs, other colleagues. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing that introduction for them to your CISO friend to sign a check. Sure, maybe down the road, eventually, that's what the startup wants. But as long as you frame it in the correct way, whenever I do an introduction, I try to do an introduction to a CISO that I know has that problem or something alike, similar to that problem that the startup is trying to solve. So it's really making that connection based on a value perspective. So, part of breaking in is trying to, well, hey, have some of those conversations with VCs, but also meet various startups, meet various CEOs, and just have a discussion, a conversation about, well, what is it that they're actually looking for, and try to think about what can you do to support them going forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you've got to really do the research and really understand things and go out there to actually support somebody as well. So I think that's awesome advice. Again, Frank, it's absolutely brilliant. But you touched on something earlier that I want to kind of deep on. So you talked about AI, machine learning, all the new things and the hot topics of the world. But what do you think about and tell me your predictions for the security market?
That's very interesting as we look across even decades of security. We do see some trends going from kind of protective capabilities to identification capabilities to detective capabilities and response and so on. One of the key things, especially in this larger macro environment where, hey, if budgets are not necessarily increasing, maybe they're not decreasing, but at least they're flat, which in this environment means they're kind of decreasing, right? And I hear this from so many CISOs. I've had luxury in prior years of having increasing budgets. So it made it a little bit easier, right? Whenever revenue's increasing, whenever budgets are increasing, it makes it a little bit easier to get things done. So in this environment, I would say that from a trend perspective to your question, well, there's going to be a shift. It's not just detecting stuff, just finding stuff, identifying bad things is not going to be enough anymore. And we know that we can't grow the security team in size, right, to be commensurate to the problem that we necessarily have. So from an automation perspective, this is where AI is interesting as well in terms of kind of augmenting the capabilities of your analysts, your engineers, your teams overall. And I think that there's going to be more. You asked, hey, how does security become a business enabler? This is where we got to try to figure out, well, what are the options? How do we get to yes in different ways? How do we get other people in the organization involved from a remediation perspective, from an automated remediation perspective, making security a little bit of everybody's job. Now, of course, from a technical perspective, we see this with the cloud. And now it's not just about security per se, pushing down cloud security requirements, but the DevOps team, the development teams, the engineering teams all have a part to play in that as well. I think for me, a trend going forward is, hey, that's going to move beyond the technical realm, and other people, other teams, groups within the organization are going to get more involved in security as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool, and there's so many cool vendors coming out and things like that over the next 3-4 years. I think we'll see a lot more kind of growth, especially within the AI space. I asked that question to a lot of the people, as I'm sure you do, Frank. But I know we're kind of running out of time today, but really appreciate you coming on the show. Like I said, the first time somebody from the same company has come on, so really appreciate your time today, Frank, and look forward to watching you grow.
Elliott, appreciate it. Thanks a lot for having me.
Awesome.